Alrighty, well, it is Sunday. It's Sunday, October the 12th, in the year of our Lord 2025. And there's Rocky having a sleep. He's had quite a bit to eat this morning, and he's had his pain medication. So he's having a sleep now anyway. There he is. Pretty cute. Yeah. Anyway, being in Carleton Place yesterday, as I had to go to the Home Depot store, brought back some memories. As I lived in Carleton Place for 2 years, from 1980 to 82, basically mid 1980 to mid 1982. Back then, the town had a population of 5,000. Now it has a population of 11,000. It's grown quite a bit. It used to be smaller than my hometown of Perth, where I come from. And it was a very standoffish place. If you weren't from there, you were never truly accepted. And so I remember getting into some awful fistfights on the street and whatnot, being jumped on the street and all that. This is back when I was like 13, 14 years old, in that age range. Anyway, the story I want to tell today is kind of comical in a way, although it wasn't funny at the time at all. At least I didn't think it was. I used to go to a barber up on Bridge Street in Carleton Place, which was the main street, still is the main street in downtown. And his name was Howard McNeely. And Howard McNeely was also an auctioneer. So he was a barber and an auctioneer. Anyway, I think Howard McNeely was the worst barber in history. I don't know what he was like as an auctioneer, but he sucked as a barber. And I'll tell you why. I remember back then a haircut was $2. Believe it or not, a haircut was $2. And sometimes we had trouble coming up with the $2. Yeah, so this is going back anyway. But anyway, what Howard McNeely used to do, I go up there on a Saturday to get my hair cut. And Howard McNeely had a television in the corner of the barber shop. And it was one of those old 1950s TVs with, it was a cabinet model type TV. And it had a round screen. I don't know how many of you remember seeing TVs like that, but those were a thing at one time. The picture tube was round. And anyway, it was black and white. And Howard McNeely used to love to watch football. And on Saturday afternoons, there was always a football game on. And so he'd have the TV on, and he'd be watching the football game. And what he would do is, rather than stand beside the chair and cut my hair and pay attention to what he was doing to my hair, this is back when I still had hair, mind you. All this was filled in with hair, long time ago, like I said. Had trouble coming up with the $2, but always had the hair to cut, Anyway, he would, instead of doing that and then, walking around the chair from one side of me to the other to cut my hair, what he would do is he would sit on a stool beside the barber chair, and he'd be watching the football while he was cutting my hair. And what he would do, and my eyes are watering here, they're kind of burning and watering. What he would do is he would move the chair. He'd spin the chair this way and that way. Instead of walking around, he'd just move the chair back and forth. spin it around, and then spin it back or whatever. So I'd be in the chair. I'd get out of the chair. I'd be friggin' dizzy by the time my hair was cut. And I'd always have a terrible haircut. Oh, and on top of that, his electric clippers, he never sharpened the blades on his electric clippers. So I had have razor burn all up the back of my neck and everything, So that's quite painful. You'd run that thing up the back of my neck there, and it would actually pluck the hairs out as opposed to cutting them, And I'd end up with razor burn all up the back of my neck from his clippers, from his dull clippers. Anyway, my mother decided we weren't going to patronize him anymore. I wasn't allowed to go to Howard McNeely for a haircut anymore. And she told me I had to go to this other barber who was one street over from Bridge Street on a street called Victoria Street. And I was to go to him from now on. So I go down there to this guy. No, this guy actually did a better job cutting hair. He actually paid attention to what he was doing when he was cutting your hair. And he did have good clippers that were sharp and whatnot, so I didn't get all razor burned and everything. But this guy drank like he was a heavy drinker. And he'd be half in the bag. Even half in the bag, though, he could cut hair pretty well. But, yeah, he'd be half in the bag, though. He occasionally did clip my ear with his shears. That was the only thing. He'd get right up here, or kind of clip your ear with his... And that I didn't like, because he'd probably seeing double, who knows. But you could smell the alcohol off him. He just reeked of it. And he had a big stomach. And when he was cutting my hair, I'd end up with his big stomach in my face, which I also didn't like. And, oh man. And he breathed heavy. The whole time he was cutting my hair, you'd think he was running a marathon or something, the way he'd breathe. Like, the guy was in bad shape. You could tell this is a guy who had completely ruined himself with overeating, excessive drinking, and probably a lot of tobacco, too. Like I say, he had a smell to him, you could tell, He had that smell of stale cigarettes and booze and flatulence, So it just wasn't a very nice experience going to him either. And like I say, the odd time he would get my ear with his shears, with his scissors, And I actually had my ear clipped a few times by him, when he was trying to cut my hair. So I'd come out of there oftentimes bleeding, and like that. But what he used to do too is, before you left, he'd douse you in perfume. So I'd leave there with my ear bleeding, good haircut, but with a bleeding ear, and I'd smell like a French whorehouse. Not good. When you're like a 13 or 14-year-old guy, and you're walking down the street in a town that isn't your town, and anybody who's as old as I am or older will know what I mean, especially if you come from a small town. People in small towns were standoffish in those days, and they were suspicious of strangers. They really were. It's a little different now because nobody knows anybody. Even in a small town, most of the people don't know each other. But in those days, everybody knew everybody in a small town. And if you weren't from there, then you were in a place you didn't belong. And that would be dealt with. And so I'd be walking down the street, and I used to get into fist fights on the street all the time. I was getting jumped by other guys. I was really having a hard time of it. And I was quite poor, and I looked poor. And so that also made me a target. They could tell by my shabby clothes and whatnot that I was poor, So that just added to it. My worn out shoes and my shabby clothes and all the rest of it. Anyway, walking down the street smelling like perfume certainly didn't help. Anyway, one day I leave this barber shop on Victoria Street, and I'm walking down the street, and I see a guy about my age coming the other way. And my first thought is, oh shit, here we go. Because I just knew. I just knew this was going to be trouble. Because the friggin' scent of perfume was just, like I say, I smelt like a French whorehouse. There's no other way to say it. So, anyway, of course, I meet up with this guy. I had no idea who he was, but he was a guy who looked to be about my age. And as we passed each other, he says, "You smell pretty, Fifi." Well, again, according to the rules of the street, we had to fight. The guy called me Fifi and told me I smelled pretty. It wasn't wrong, I did smell pretty. But I was no Fifi, and so I had to fight. And I did fight. We got into it pretty bad. We got fist fighting, and he kicked the shit out of me. I'm not going to lie to you and pretend that I mopped up the sidewalk with him or anything. I did get a few good pokes in. He didn't come away completely unscathed, but as you all know, in a street fight, he who is the least hurt is the winner. And by a long shot, he was the least hurt. He beat the shit out of me. And that's no exaggeration. He pounded the piss out of me. And I was hurt. I had a black eye and my face all smashed in. I was all scuffed. I was all friggin' road rashed and everything else from bouncing off the concrete, all the rest of it. He put it right to me. And he worked me over pretty good anyway. And like I say, I did get a few good pokes in. I was no slouch either, but I wasn't as strong as he was, I'll tell you, and I wasn't as good a fighter as he was either, and he mopped the sidewalk with me is what happened. So yeah, like I say, I held my own in a way, but not good enough anyway. And I lost the fight. He won the fight. That's what happened there. But still, it was what it was. I couldn't just not fight him after him saying that. So we had to fight. That was just how it was. That was the rule. And again, any guys who were as old as me or older will remember that that's how it was. World, people romanticize the past, but they forget how tough it really was and how tough you had to be to live in those times too. Now we got a whole other set of problems, and mostly created by our political leaders and by people who are so cognitively dissonant that they don't realize they're being manipulated into a load of crap, into believing things they shouldn't believe, and so on, and into really being opposing each other, thinking the other guy's your enemy, just because of some crap that's being promoted by some expert in a high place or whatever, Anyway, the real enemies are the ones doing the manipulating, and they're untouchable because they're in gated communities and they got their security guards and, all in their armor-plated limousines and all the rest, and their private jets and all the rest of it. But those are the real enemies anyway. Those are the ones we should be dealing with. But anyway, getting back to my story, going to the barber in Carleton Place, in the town of Carleton Place, in 1980, 81, 82, in that era, was an ordeal. Trust me when I tell you. There were two barbers in the town, and neither one of them was any good. One of them was just less bad than the other, that's all. Because at least you got a halfway decent looking haircut from the one guy who was slowly killing himself with various vices, you know. Anyway, I'm sure they're both long gone now. Howard McNeely is dead, I know that, and for many years. And the other guy, I can't even remember his name now, but I can still picture him in his stained white t-shirt with the big gut hanging out. And, every time he went around me, I had that freaking gut in my face. That was fun. But yeah, and the smell of him, too, The guy smelled like, he smelled like a distillery that was next door to a cigarette factory, and the cigarette factory had burned down the day before. That's what the guy smelled like. Oh, it was awful. Anyway, he should have used some of that perfume on himself. Then he could be a pretty smelling Fifi too. you know. Anyway, what a friggin' mess. I remember one day, because after that fight especially, I was kind of fed up. And the next time I went in there, he picked up the bottle of perfume, and he was going to douse me with that again, spray me with it. And I put my hand up and I said, no, 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 none of that, And the son of a bitch sprayed me with it anyway. Didn't listen, just kept hitting me with it, It's like, what on earth, But, you don't have to do this. I'm asking you not to do it. Why are you doing this? Anyway, there you have it. That's my story of the barbers in Carleton Place in the early 1980s. 45 years ago now. It's hard to believe, but it is. It's 45 years. Long time. All right. Well, I guess we'll talk to you later. Bye for now.